The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is a literature short. These are short videos to revise each chapter of Jekyll and Hyde. And in this video, we're going to look at Chapter 3, Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. This will be a short video. It's a particularly short chapter, barely 800 words, so we will look briefly at the events of the chapter and then comment on 3 quotations. First, the events of the chapter. This chapter describes events 2 weeks on from the close of Chapter 3. Dr. Jekyll has had a dinner party attended by 5 or 6 well-respected men. Mr. Utterson stays behind after the other men leave. Jekyll and Utterson sit by the fire and talk. Utterson brings up the subject of Jekyll's will. Jekyll dismisses Utterson's worries, but when Utterson says that he's been learning more about Hyde, Jekyll becomes more serious. Jekyll explains that his situation is complicated, but that he can be free of Hyde whenever he wants. Jekyll asks Utterson to promise that he will help Hyde if Jekyll is ever taken away or no longer here. Now let's have a closer look at some of the quotations from Chapter 3. We'll have a look at this line, which describes the guests at Jekyll's dinner party. Intelligent, reputable men and all judges of good wine. The men are being described not by their names or professions or physical features, as we might expect, and this gives us a clear indication of the middle-class values of the time. Intelligence, respectability and reputation, and a value is placed on being a connoisseur of wine, one of the finer things in life for these men, and the respectable face perhaps to alcoholism. Wine was relatively expensive compared to, say, beer in the Victorian era, so to be a good judge of wine would have meant a degree of wealth, certainly something that men like this would have taken pride in. This description leads on to the discussion between Utterson and Jekyll, and we see that Utterson is determined to steer Jekyll away from any associations with a criminal like Hyde. We learn in this chapter that the men are interested in protecting each other from the damage caused by a mark against one's name, as well as maintaining their own positions of respectability. We see too that they enjoyed socialising with each other, that they surrounded themselves with like-minded people, and while this is hardly surprising, for don't we all enjoy spending time with friends, it is interesting to note that Utterson is, in fact, a popular man, and other intelligent and reputable men craved his attention. Here, his character is developing a little from the reserved and neutral lawyer that we met in Chapter 1. It is also interesting that we are given the first description of Henry Jekyll in this chapter. Notice how the description of Hyde came first and was so horrific that it gave Utterson nightmares. And when Jekyll is described, we discover that he has quite a lovely face. I'll put a quotation up here. A large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness. Notice the reference to his large face. Of course, we know from Chapter 2 that Hyde is small, so here we have an immediate and visual contrast between the two men, which again reinforces the theme of duality through this imagery. Additionally, the fact that he is well-made and smooth-faced brings about a sense of purity to our understanding of Jekyll. He's not haggard and deformed as we imagine Hyde to be. These phrases can be juxtaposed with Stevenson's description of Hyde. Indeed, he was described as having Satan's signature on his face. The fact that he bears the mark of kindness is another reason that helps us to understand why Jekyll was liked by his friends, and their loyalty towards him makes sense. Contrast once more with Hyde, who just in Chapter 2 had snarled aloud into a savage laugh before disappearing into the house. It's important that we look to every part of the text to really understand the contrasts embedded in the themes of the novel, and their physicality is no exception. Now, let's turn to this line. At this point in this short chapter, Jekyll is telling Utterson that his problem is not one that is easily solved. He says, "It is one of those affairs that cannot be mended by talking." It is worth looking at Stevenson's language here, for we can take several things from this line. First, we learn a little more about the men and the context. We understand that they are intellectuals, and By that I mean educated people who enjoyed thinking about, studying and discussing complex ideas and were specialists in their field. Despite our understanding of a stiff and upright class who very much kept problems to themselves to maintain their reputations, we're given a glimpse of the closeness between the men here, for it seems that Jekyll is usually willing to solve problems with Utterson by talking them through. Perhaps this gives us a little more insight into the complexities of their lives and relationships and friendships, and therefore reflects society in Victorian Britain with a little more nuance than some of the sweeping statements that it's tempting to make about them all being repressed and unable to discuss their feelings. Let's also pause to look at the word mended here. It's relatively early in the novel, and Jekyll is acknowledging a problem, and although he insists that he doesn't want to change his will, indeed he does not even want to talk about the matter any longer, the fact that Stevenson selects the word mended for Jekyll's problem is indicative of an acknowledgement of the damage that already lies beneath. We do not try to mend something that isn't damaged or broken. Lastly, just one small aside regarding Stevenson's language for Jekyll at the end of this chapter. At the end of their conversation, Jekyll claims that he only asks for justice, surely choosing his words carefully for his lawyer friend, whose whole career is built on the pursuit of justice. We see that he is a clever and manipulative man indeed. That brings us to the end of this video. I'll return soon with a look at chapter 4. Until then, thanks for watching, and goodbye. A large, well-made, smoothed-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness.